Hello, this is John Huey. This is yet another episode of the Sober Atheist podcast. I'm here with my friend and co host Michael Tingley, and I'm also here today with our first guest, a gentleman by the name of John C., who hails from Paris, France, as well as other parts of the world. You may hear an inflection in his voice that isn't exactly Parisian. So, he's a very interesting fellow and someone I've known for nearly 10 years now. We met at the first convention for atheists and agnostics in this program I used to be a member of, which I'm not going to mention the name of. He'll probably mention it, but I won't. But we were at that convention and met, and I was just reminiscing with him a little bit before this started, and told him that I remarked to my wife, who was sitting next to me at the time, that there's a real atheist speaking at this conference, which was something I found kind of interesting because there were a lot of opinions that were being expressed there that weren't exactly in accord with my own. So he's an interesting guy with a very wide, lengthy experience in sobriety, and also, I believe, one of the originators of the first secular meetings in Europe. So he can talk to us a little bit about that, as well as many other things. He's an interesting person. I'll turn it over to Mr. John C. to begin our chat. Hello, Mr. C.
Hello, Mr. J.H. I don't know what I can call you other than
Whatever.
yeah. It has been a real pleasure to have known you, John, for 10 years because you're somebody who spends a hell of a lot of time on helping people, and especially people who are non-believers, but really anybody. You're willing to help anybody, and you're the one who puts that, for me, the spirit of AA, the spirit of AA into action. You're like Mr. Into Action. You're great because you help it. You're willing to help everybody, and you spend a lot of time. And I don't spend as much time as you on helping people to recover, but I do spend quite a bit of time, and I have spent quite a bit of time for a good number of years. So just a brief introduction. I've lived in Europe since 1987, in Germany and in France mainly. Before I lived in Holland as well. That was a drug time. And I also lived in in South America for a while, but I grew up in Amarillo, Texas, which is the panhandle of Texas. But I managed to get out of Amarillo when I was 18 and go to the bustling, wonderful metropolis of Austin, which in the mid 70s, when I was late 70s, when I was a college student, it was a super hippy dippy. Austin is the San Francisco of Texas, and that was a really cool place. But I became a wreck in my 20s, and all the alcohol and all the drugs, they added up very, very quickly and led me to a disastrous life. And the first, I had many accidents, I had many mishaps. Fortunately, I was never, other than thrown in drunk tanks, a couple times. I never had any serious legal issues, but I had car accidents, which were bad. I had falling down accidents and fights and shit. And I was a wreck. And fortunately, my mom pushed me into recovery, and pushing somebody into recovery in the mid 80s in Amarillo, Texas, there was only one room, and that's called Alcoholics Anonymous. And so, of course, I went there. And the very first time that I went there, she told me, I told her first, I said, this thing is I didn't say fucking, this thing is a cult. And she's like, it's not a cult, it's a helping hand. And it's probably both. I guess it's both. It's not a cult in the sense that like I just saw this Netflix documentary on the Raelians, who,
Right.
like,
Or
yeah,
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 Jim
yeah.
Jones. Yeah.
Oh, well, I mean, it's not, at least if you want to really characterize it as a cult, it's a beneficent cult, mainly, but not entirely. And I think there are parts of it that are more culty than others. If I look at recovery in Europe and in Paris, where I have lived, it is pretty tolerant, I'd say, even to the extent of being extremely tolerant of some things, right? Tolerant of sexuality, tolerant of, yeah, different races and all these kind of things. But where they fucking are absolutely not tolerant is somebody who says, I'm an atheist. Nobody, if you go to AA meetings, and I did it for such a long time, and it's not that 100% of the people are not tolerant, but they don't understand. They don't like it, and they think, and I've had people tell me this, maybe you have too, it's like, people like you are a danger to AA. I've heard that more than once, which is okay. I mean, some people think that. I don't care. I kept going. I met atheists very seldom, though. I remember there was one guy in Austin, and he was that guy who was Charlie, I think his name was. I'm not sure, but yeah, I think it was Charlie. And he's like got the A meeting started there, and I met him at a regular meeting
Charlie
once.
Polachair.
Yeah,
I
there
knew
you go. Thank you. Yeah.
he helped us when we started when he was still in California. He founded the West Hollywood meeting out there.
Right, right,
And
right,
then
right,
he
right.
retired and moved with his son to where you met.
Yeah, yeah. So I met him, and I had coffee with him once or twice when I was visiting Austin because I've always gone back there uh, to see friends and to jump in Barton Springs and other cool places. But anyway, he probably was the first real atheist that I met, but also around then. And this was the very end of the 90s or the early 2000s. I did go to West Village Agnostics, they call the meeting. In the West Village, and there I met, and I remember the woman's name. Her name was Paula, and she spoke with this extremely strong New York accent, and she was the first person I think who not only said they're an atheist, but that a lot of the stuff is total bullshit. And some people can say they're atheists, they're agnostic, they're whatever, but people are in recovery. They're certainly afraid to come out as not believing in the whole kit and caboodle of stuff that we learn. Like, for example, I don't know, spiritual, not religious. That's one of their favorite ones, right?
John, could I say I responded? Just remember what I was going to respond to when you said that when you said the word atheist in meetings in AA meetings, you 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 said the response was well pretty much I guess disgust in a way and confusion and disbelief and because they don't really know what atheist even means. Well, I had that same experience out here in Indiana. When I finally came out as an atheist at an AA meeting, I one person came up to me, and this is a pretty big meeting, uh, 35, 40 people there. One person came up to me after the meeting and said that she was an atheist, but she had no reason to tell anyone, and she was never going to say anything about it in an AA meeting.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
that was
yeah.
it. That was the only person who talked to me. Everybody else just ignored the fact and just it went right over their heads like the meaningless word, atheist. Yeah, it's
Absolutely. It goes
amazing.
over many people's heads, and the first time I ever came out was at that Santa Monica convention in 2014. And I don't know why I was inspired, but because the name of that convention was We Agnostics and Free Thinkers International AA Convention. So then as part of my talk, what I said was, well, where's the other A in this thing? And then, so then after the meetings and stuff, we changed the name to We Atheists, or We Agnostics, Atheists and Freethinkers, which was good. And that was the name for the Austin convention, which was 2 years later, just after the elections of 2016. So everybody, I think, many people, certainly many people were not in good mood at that convention. But we worked on that. Also, John worked on it, and I was on the board, and we worked on it quite hard. And what we tried to do, and was for me not enforce some kind of ideological purity, but to say that, yeah, we're atheists. And that's also where we had the first afternoon with the atheists. We had it at the Austin and the Toronto conventions. And at those, there were people who, at the at the so-called secular, whatever you want to call it, convention, those people were furious that,
Oh, a
you
lady yelled in Austin. I'll never forget the lady from the audience that yelled at me, "Fuck you!" She yelled
yeah.
very loud, you know. And then somebody went after Vic.
I mean, I don't think I was certainly never. Maybe it was kind of on a scale where I just moved more and more in that direction. But we started and we called it initially, of course, we called it the We Agnostics meeting here, and then we changed it to the Agnostics meeting, and that was over 25 years ago. And uh, because for me, there was stuff in all those books and prayer, and we thought it was extremely revolutionary, to have a meeting without any kind of prayer, right? We thought it was, the other thing was we used the steps, but then we took the word God out, and those are the so-called agnostic steps. And so I think that was the first, the first thing. And we read those steps up until at that meeting up until 2 years ago. And then there was another person in our group who started, because people who are in AA anyway, people who want recovery, they want the so-called program, or they want at least a framework of things that they can do that they think will guarantee them to continue in recovery or will help them or whatever.
I came out the first week of January 1987. There was never any doubt whatsoever in my groups that I went to when I started who I was. Although they constantly told me, particularly in the first year or two, I literally would have people, I mentioned this before somewhere, I think, people would come up to me, pat me on the shoulder, and sort of whisper, we all know you're going to get it sooner or later. That kind of shit. All right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we've all had like different experiences in dealing with this, but it's almost like, doing something in a Catholic church that's inappropriate, it seems.
Well, yes, yeah. I mean, it is certainly too much. People will bear things, and people will bear what one says if you speak in their semantics. In other words, if you say even stuff like, oh, my higher power is the heavens, or my higher
Yes.
power is whatever. But as long as but you still have to say, I have this higher power. And then if you say, well, I don't believe in this higher power shit, then they're like, oh, they get like really upset.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, for people like me that have no book of Indian lore, or no hippie California sweat lodge to chant in, it's a problem for them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they don't want to talk about it.
And that's just the normal people, because if you do go to a meeting and you get into the discussion of one of the more dreadful steps, which is the third step or the seventh, or I don't remember, they all kind of mix together except for the third step. If you're in a discussion and you have to read along with people in those books, which after so many years in AA, it just became so boring. A lot of it is reading that stuff over and over again, and it's very, very similar to what evangelical Christians anyway would do by reading the Bible, or maybe Catholics about the liturgy or whatever. So it's yeah. I mean, what can you say? I mean, what's the point of going to a Catholic church if you say you should stand up in front of everybody else and say, I don't believe in the Virgin Mary, I
Well,
don't believe in the Trinity, I don't believe in this. So what's the point of going to those meetings, those traditional meetings? For me, I stopped shortly before the pandemic. And of course, with the pandemic, everything's changed.
yeah. Well, for good and ill, I think that people that are struggling as atheists, the pandemic kicking that Zoom thing into higher gear was extremely important if you're isolated, particularly if you're in a community like here in the U.S. You can be the only identifiable atheist in your entire community.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
try
mean, a
Terre Haute,
lot of
Indiana. I was kind of shocked when I moved out here from New York City to find how just common language, how it was just normal. One of the first questions I got from people was, "What church do you go to?" It was just automatic that you went to a church,
exactly.
and so even outside of AA. I mean, even on the street, it's still a difficult thing to claim that I am an atheist because it just doesn't compute. It's not in anybody's vocabulary. So it's a problem. And then I imagine, but I can't help but imagine there are many more people who don't believe, that are just afraid to actually say it. And that's the unfortunate thing for me. The fact that the
Yeah. Well,
language
And
is has
Michael, their fear is also reinforced. Their fear
yes.
is reinforced because, I mean, people are, if I go across town to one of those meetings and I say all the stuff that I said for quite a few years and directly contradict what they said and say I don't believe this and all this, I mean, it's still going to work into quite a little bit of an argument depending on how strident I am about how I say what I say. But if someone who is new comes in or has 1 month or 1 year or 3 years, and one of the old timer people that who is a more fundamentalist person, and there are plenty of them,
Mhm.
then they will shut those people down and make them feel like shit, or tell them that, well, if you I heard it recently with the a guy's like his sponsor told him that, if you don't find a higher power, you will get drunk. Not God, maybe, but you got it. Or they'll say it's God. If you don't find God, you'll get drunk. If you don't find a higher power, you can get drunk. What is the difference?
Yeah.
well, we get fairly regularly, and I know you've had this experience too, John, with people approaching us and saying, "Thank you for being outspoken." Right? Thank you
Yes.
for speaking up. Thank you for putting up this podcast thingy or responding on one of those ridiculous Facebook pages or whatever. Uh, it's fundamental to some people, but my response, I generally am more gentle with people that approach me, but in the back of my mind, I'm saying, well, you're thanking me for speaking up. Why don't you speak up?
Yeah, and I remember that is in some ways it's wonderful, and in some ways, like I remember when I went to that first or second anyway meeting in New York, and Paula said, and I said something. I was like, well, what do you think then about? Because I was just so curious. What do you think about the Big Book or whatever? Just all that trash, it's like, and if you like, which that in any regular A meeting I know of, that is complete heresy. If you say the
Oh,
Big
yeah.
Book is trash, that's
Well,
heretical.
look
Mhm.
at on the so-called secular recovery pages, more than 50% of the time is spent discussing the finer points of those sorts of things.
Oh yeah, oh
It's
yeah, yeah,
crazy.
yeah, yeah,
It's
yeah, yeah. Yeah.
mucho loco,
But John, don't forget, I mean, from where we've come from, there has been progress. Because in 2014,
right?
we agnostics and atheists convention, they invited an Episcopal priest to be the headline speaker. So,
Exactly.
and then at the second one in Austin, they invited the guy at the Grapevine to put
The
up his
young,
booth. And they wanted to have, remember all this, they wanted to have the person who was the top person of the Grapevine, the editor or whatever, as the keynote speaker. And
yeah, she
fortunately,
was
because of
there.
you, and me, then, and she was certainly there, and she did speak at another thing, and many people came to hear what she had to say, which I guess is fine. Maybe it was put up against Afternoon with the Atheist, but a lot of people came to hear what we had to say as well. So we should not forget to get our word out. And I'll say one final
No,
thing about this, and it is if you compare this, and I got to go back to 2014 again, because not living in the United States, and I mean I like California. California is quite a progressive place, but I've not spent a lot of time there. But when we went to Santa Monica, and I said something about a gay meeting, and somebody corrected me, and they said, "Oh no, it's not the gay meeting; it's the LGBTQ plus meeting." So we're talking about that and so I got to my conclusion of this is that atheists we're like the transsexuals of the recovering secular community. It's like people don't know what to do with us. Like, oh wow, they don't really
yeah,
know shit. Like
that's
an
like,
atheist
yeah,
in a
that,
spiritual meeting, they don't like that.
that's pretty extreme. Yeah. Yeah,
Yes.
it's like, well,
Yeah.
some atheists came and performed surgery on your brain and changed the nature of your humanity somehow, you know,
Absolutely.
because you espouse what's rational as opposed to what isn't. And
Mm,
you say that
mm.
our very existence is a challenge to the irrational. The
Well,
fact
yes,
that
and
we
and there's the
exist.
big component of AA to say that in some degree or another, it is, if not a kind of faith healing, it is a miracle that we found sobriety, or it is the more religious term would be the grace of God that we found sobriety. The one thing is they don't want to say is like I shouldn't get the personal credit myself for keeping myself sober, which is completely odd, right?
Well, people who stand up are incredibly important. Like, we weren't at that meeting in California that night where you stood up and got them to change the name. But conceptually, what you did that evening was extremely important. It made a vast difference to what people were able to say they were in that context.
Yes.
Just the name.
Yeah.
That's why you got up and insisted upon it.
Yeah. And, just as an aside, a little parenthesis here is that we will be having, for the people who are listening to this, we will be having the Afternoon with the Atheists panel at the Orlando convention in September. And we want people to, if people want to join that panel, it would be great. We want to have a diversity of people, not just old white guys over 50 or over 60 or whatever. And we have had a diversity in the past, but we need to figure out who's going to be on that panel as an atheist. And it would be great to have a woman, a young person, to say, this is my experience with being an atheist in recovery, because everyone's experience is really different, and it's more difficult for some rather than others. Of course, with the internet now, there are a wide variety of meetings for people to touch base with other atheists in recovery. And I'm really, really glad, and I thank you again for starting the Sunday online meeting, because and it's a non-affiliated meeting with any AA, NA, whatever, but it's open to to everybody if you're an addict or an alcoholic or whatever. And we can say people don't have to worry about it. They can say absolutely what they want. And that is so refreshing, and people are so honest. And I think that is the thing that's impressed me for years about these secular meetings is that generally people are just way more honest. They don't have to repeat spiritual, not religious. They don't have to repeat one day at a time. They don't have to mimic all the AA stuff. They can say whatever they
Well,
want.
it's getting increasingly difficult for me to even listen to any of that stuff.
Well, how do you get
So
the word out
I'm
to
on
more
the other end.
younger people? I mean, you said before that from seeing all the Zoom meetings that we go to, all the secular Zoom meetings we go to, it's pretty much a bunch of old white guys that have had some good amount of sobriety. How do you get the newcomer, the younger people, who I'm sure there are many of them that do not believe in God, but they go along with that ritual because they're told that's the only alternative. How do we get them to know about this and what we're doing? Because
W-
this is obviously working.
Well, we keep publicizing,
Mhm.
we keep talking about it, and all we can do is hope that people from other demographics. I mean, let's face the facts. Our demographic is a bit these days a bit off-putting to some people. They make assumptions about who and what we are because we've been sober such a long time and we're old and stuff like that. But I think the more information that we put out, the more likely it is that younger people that are earlier along on the curve will pick up the mantle and continue. That's the only hope that I have. I'm at my age. I've already got an archive of things there, and we're creating a new archive of things here with our efforts. And now we're bringing in people from the outside, like John, who have vast experience and knowledge of how these things work. And hopefully, little by little, people will pick up on that and continue in their own way, in ways that maybe we can't even anticipate. I don't know what else we can do other than what we're doing. I'm open to any and all
Yeah, I mean,
suggestions.
one thing we've seen is publishing, and there's this guy who wrote the book "Getting Sober Without God," and that's like a darling of a lot of these secular meetings. And then he's also, I mean, people love to make money off these books, right? So,
Right.
I'm not, and that's another thing about you and me and Michael. So I'm not looking to make any money off of this stuff. But but "Getting Sober Without God" is one, and then the other one is. Your friend Joe C's book, Agnostic Musings for a 12-Step Life, which I use in the regular in the AA meetings because I think some of it is thoughtful, some of it is dumb, and some of it is too much like AA. But here for me, like leading a secular meeting, it's like it can be tough because also since COVID, I think attendance is down. I was reading like in public schools, attendance is down, but a lot of people, they'll just go online. And I really like having a meeting in my neighborhood. I'm old school. Like, and my people at work, I'm like, go and visit the damn customer. I don't want to hear you about you having another Zoom meeting or Teams meeting or whatever they're doing, So it's like, let's get out there. It's just so much more fun to have a life than sitting in a room with a computer, which we did so much during COVID. But on the other hand, if I'm traveling, if I can't go to a face-to-face meeting, I will do it. And it is very helpful. And I think that's what the majority of young people are used to doing is they will just go
Yeah,
online.
yeah.
And I've seen some of them online, quite a few.
Well, if we can populate the digital world with reality as opposed to fantasy within the context of our sober experience, it's almost like if you want it, you can find it. But I think it's our responsibility while we can, when we can, to try to make these things more accessible.
Yeah.
That's why I was happy when this podcast got listed on Apple. More people started looking and listening on these various platforms. But, that doesn't change the fact that our content is inherently what it is. I mean, these are, we're old white guys with many years of sobriety. I mean, we're
They
not
wear
going to
glasses
change
and
that.
blue shirts.
That's for
Uh,
sure. That's for sure.
well, I love my blue shirts, and I've got a full complement of them. I have some that are much dressier and more expensive than this one that I used to wear to fancy business meetings. But since I don't go
This
to
is a
Silicon,
Parisian cashmere
yeah,
sweater,
that's
not a blue
Yeah,
shirt.
that's
a
close. It's
California.
close.
You're a
It's
California
close.
casual today, John. You're ready to go to Silicon Valley
I would
anytime.
think
Just
that
get
the
on the plane.
internet generation would be more attracted to this process, what we've done with Zoom and secular meetings, and I'm just hopeful that they will start plugging in more and giving up on the face to face traditional stuff that's out there as a positive alternative. So that's I'm hoping for
Yeah,
anyway.
well, maybe we should advertise a little bit, John. Maybe if you can find somebody younger than Medicare age who can speak in Europe, please refer them to us.
Yeah.
And we'll be looking for
Well, we got a
people.
few. We got our buddy out there in Oklahoma. I think he'd probably speak very well, right? And
Yeah,
he's younger.
he speaks very well, but it's not a good idea for him to be on here
All right.
in a international forum. So because of the location that he's in. So we have to think about people's safety too. Yeah, and that's why we're going to Orlando. I've got a workshop that I'm presenting. I'm going to see what they make of my little rap this time. And John's organizing Afternoon with the Atheists, and just showing up and being there and talking to people. I'm going to have some equipment with me. We're going to try to do some podcasting from Orlando this September. And we're just going to have to do the best we can, right, John? I don't see any other.
Well, it'll be fun.
alternative.
It'll be fun.
Yeah, we're good to go. We're good to go. Well, we're like, you know, uh, in some ways, we're like that old, you know, Diogenes looking in the darkness for the honest man. We can, romanticize ourselves in that way if we like. But I think mainly we're just, individuals doing the best we can to
Exactly.
promote reality
Yeah.
over fantasy.
Yeah.
That's all.
Yeah, and
Pretty damn.
I don't think we all have a firm viewpoint though, but I think for me there is one thing that if there's anything, and there are a few things for me to hold on to from the years that I was in AA and that would be, for me anyway, I am about abstinence. I was a little concerned, I think, about this whole harm reduction trend of thought, like, oh, it's okay to get high, it's okay to do this, and I don't tell other people what to do, but for me, certainly, it would be extremely dangerous to start smoking weed. It would be extremely dangerous to start, I don't know, taking benzodiazepines or speed or anything, whether it's legal or not legal. And getting older, doctors are, every time you go to a doctor, they're happy to give you another pill, and some of the pills are good, some pills are less good. But I think that's one thing that for me, I have to come and state really firmly. That's for me a definite reality thing. Is it's about abstinence.
Oh, yeah. I mean, for me too. I think one of the purposes behind the idea of this podcast is to look at, there aren't many absolutes that we have, but abstinence is an absolute value, at least for me. You either are or you aren't. It's like, you're either an atheist or you aren't. I mean, that's pretty cut and dry. But in the context of sobriety, if everyone I met who tries to cut a deal to get around that word abstinence is either dead or drinking in a bad way somewhere. That's been my experience. And, for us ancient mariners, staying active is extremely important in terms of our own mental health, not what we can contribute to people that are earlier along in the process than us. We still derive a lot of benefit from it years and years later.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And that's a point of evidence in and of itself. You like to use the word hope, Michael. That is one of the things that provides us with hope, right? Because this continuum, this continuation is only possible if we maintain our abstinence and reinforce the decision that brought us to that day when we became so. It's not complicated, but it's very profound. But it's mysterious, too. I'm thinking of an episode for us soon called Atheism and Mystery. I'm thinking about that. You'll love that. That's really going to stir the pot.
Prof, I mean, I suppose there is some mystery in recovery. I mean, I can't really
absolutely.
give a complete explanation about how I managed not to drink and do drugs all these years, but I suppose there is some mystery in it. So, but
Well,
that's okay, right?
there's mystery in life too.
Yes, absolutely.
You walk from one room into another, and your entire life changes. Sometimes that's happened to me, and not everything is cut and dried, but it's all at root rational. I mean, mystery isn't supernatural; it's rational.
Are emotions rational?
Emotions are often chemical. When you release too much anger, for example, you can lose not only your train of thought, but your ability to think at all. And since I've been sober, I could be a little contentious, John. You may have noticed, I can be a tad contentious. Like
Just a tad. Well,
when
second
somebody
round.
puts up a grapevine booth in a hall where I'm speaking, that could start something. I regretted about 2 sentences of my response to that. But, the few times I can think back on my business career, a couple of times when I made bad mistakes was because I became too angry. And when I became too angry, I said something that wasn't rationally based. It was totally coming from this other place. So, there are things that, the people that are so-called sober in those programs tell you that you have no right to any anger at all. You heard that one?
Well, anger
You
is
have no right to any anger at all. No, what we have the right
anger is the dubious luxury of every alcoholic or something like
of
this.
normal people. Well, everybody has anger, but what you learn when you get sober is to maybe have some rational control over it. And when you made a mistake, when you've lost it, right? I mean, when you're drinking or using, do you really know when you've lost it? Okay. I don't, it's like, so we've got a shot at a more rational, more reasonable life.
Right.
And that's maybe what we can say to some of these younger folks.
Sure. But it's interesting that you bring up the whole thing about the so-called alcoholic personality. So there is the question then, and I can let you pose it to you guys, is there an alcoholic personality? Or,
No.
for example, let me finish is selfishness and self-centeredness the root of all our problems?
But I have noticed after observing, alcoholics closely for a long, long, long time, that many of us, and I could include myself in this, we have a tendency to excess of all kinds. I've observed that in many of my fellow people, right? And where that tendency for excess comes from is probably some sort of inherent thing that many of us don't fully understand. But if you know you have the tendency, it's just like you're drinking. If you know you have a certain tendency, when it asserts itself and it's interfering with your life, you can see it.
Sure.
When you're using, you don't have a chance of seeing your tendency toward excess, do you?
Absolutely not. And I think sometimes many things, no matter what it is we do, it is easy to ignore some part of that, right? It's easy to ignore. It's easy to justify one's behavior. That's a human characteristic, right? And I don't think it's also particularly appropriate to alcoholics, but
Yeah, I
self-justification is
mean,
easy.
there, I think that maybe in the DSM somewhere there are some classifications for addictive personality disorders
Mm,
that sort of, go across the spectrum. When you start talking about people having this or that personality, you could very easily end up uh, uh, casting aspersions or putting unfair labels on people,
mm,
which is something I think the average atheist certainly doesn't want to do.
mm.
Your behavior, basically, the only part of your behavior that is really any concern of mine, except the most extreme sort of criminal type stuff, is are you drinking or not today in the context of this recovery world we're in?
Yeah. Well, what about the people? What about the dry drunk? Have you ever been on a dry drunk,
Oh,
John?
I've been called a dry drunk more. I've been called a bitter old dry drunk because
Oh, there you
who
go. Oof.
needs. I mentioned this in a previous podcast. I was once called on one of those beyond belief things on the YouTube comment box. I was once referred to as a bitter old dry drunk who needs to do the steps.
Oh,
And that was a high point in my day that day. That was
yeah. Absolutely. Well, and I mean,
that was a
because the steps are a panacea. No matter what you have, the steps will fix it. They will fix you. They will fix anything. That is what is propagated by a lot of those people.
right
Do they fix
where
anything? That's a question other than not drinking and maybe, I think admitting, for me to admit I'm wrong is not always easy. And when I see it and realize that is somehow cathartic in behavior, it's good, you know? But I don't know what's good about that stuff.
well we can recognize when we've gone individually, if we're sober, when we've gone too far for ourselves, we've got a shot at recognizing that,
Hmm.
right? If we have a tendency to be certain ways, and people are not uniform, they have different tendencies depending on their background, personality type, and circumstances. Things happen. But I think we've got a shot at recognizing when things happen.
Yeah,
Does that make sense? I don't know.
I think we definitely got a shot as long as we are clean and sober. Yeah, for sure. But not
Exactly.
always. I think also every human can hide things from himself as well. The thing is, we don't tell ourselves stories that you know someone, something, some fairy tale is gonna save us. That's to me the only big difference, right?
Well, we're basically stuck in reality, and what is observable and addressable by our senses and capabilities that is in front of us and apprehendable. We can apprehend what we're seeing, feeling, and doing, right? We're not
Except,
looking
John,
for something else.
except, what about Plato's allegory of the cave, where we can only see the reality that, maybe there's a bigger reality, maybe there's another reality, maybe there's an
Well, I
alternative
mean,
reality.
there's lots of realities in lots of different places. Okay, when I go to Oklahoma, for example, I get off the plane in Oklahoma and start having a fit because there are too many churches and Cracker Barrels. I mean, it's like a alternate reality space that I just don't understand. So sure, we're all sort of in our little caves. I live in a little cave here in Bethesda, Maryland. This is a little bubble cave, where we joke about it all the time. I would think that the nice neighborhood in Paris might be a little bit of a cave.
Oh, yes,
Who knows?
definitely, yes. Sure,
It's
it's a
nice.
bubble, yes.
Yeah, with a
Yeah.
set of, assumptions. Michael being an artist in Terre Haute, I bet you've had to carve out some areas for yourself.
Yeah, but that makes it so much more comfortable for some people because they think, oh, it's a God thing. God loves me, and there's this wonderful thing that loves me, and so he's making nice things happen. Of course, then when shit happens, then what the fuck do you do? Oh, you're miserable? Then you better get down on your knees, right? Yeah, yeah.
Well, we take this all the way through to the end. I lost 3 very good atheist program friends in the last year and a half or so. And when I think about these 3 guys, I'm certain that none of them went to the end filled with illusion, that they were looking at their lives at the end the way that they were looking at it when they were active and talking to me. There's a lot to be said for being consistent in and about your life in terms of reality all the way through. I've been, I was talking to my wife earlier in the week and I said, "Well, I'm feeling a little blue today." And she asked me why and I said, "Well, I was thinking about my 3 friends and, I can't speak to them anymore, meet with them anymore. And it's been a lot in the relatively short period of time." But then I said, when I thought about it again, I thought about, the kind of lives they led and the consistency they showed while living it and some of the actualization and joy that they had in their lives while they had it. And I feel a lot better because, going through things right to the end with all your faculties without your mind filled with fog and fantasy, I find that very attractive. And that's one of the things we can get from this too. Although, I don't know how younger people watching this will relate to that. It just, it's like,
Well, but I think many of younger people, if they're addicts and alcoholics, have seen people their own age
oh
die.
yeah,
So
oh
so
yeah,
yeah, I think they'll relate to it.
yeah, right in front of them sometimes.
And think about us when we were younger, Michael, with AIDS in the '80s and shit like that. So I saw a lot of people die when I was young, and
Yeah, it was a dark time. It got really dark, and I know I'm really lucky to have survived. And I knew a lot of people who survived that weren't sober, and a lot of people who didn't survive that weren't sober and were sober, and man, it was all tangled together. And yeah, we're just lucky to have survived.
There was a period where my second wife and I used to go. She knew many people in the arts community here in DC, and I knew many people from downtown. And there was a period where we were going to wakes and funerals for young people, seemed like every month or every other month during that period. And none of them were at retirement age.
oh, and
So, yeah.
No,
You
and
know, we're
for
not.
me, the being gay and being also in gay AA meetings, I also saw people in my meeting here in Paris since '91. That was my first real meeting. Was my first home group, I guess you would call it, was the gay and lesbian meeting in Paris and from '91, and several people in that meeting died, and they died sober. And I think that's the thing. They died, they didn't go back out drinking. They died sober, which I think that's like also the way I'd like to die. At the
Yeah.
very end, they're going to put you out some way, but uh, maybe we should think of something more fun to talk about than death.
Well, if you
I
have a
don't
clear
know.
head, well, we could talk about the space aliens I saw in the hospital in
Okay.
22 when they filled me up in the
Mm.
ICU with stuff. But yeah, I mean, I think we're pretty good to go. I mean, I think we've got sort of a reasonable shot at trying to tell some of the people that might be listening to this that we've had pretty reasonable and satisfying lives as atheists, looking at life in total without a lot of illusions,
Oh,
without a
absolutely.
lot of fantasy.
But the reason for that is that we've maintained sobriety. Absolutely. 100%. I have a
100%.
life beyond my wildest dreams, Johnny.
Well, I have a life behind my wildest dreams at all, despite losing all my money in Russia.
It's not about the money, dude, is it?
Okay, that's right.
All right,
That's
right,
right. I'm much happier.
right.
I'm much
And what
happier
about you,
now than
Michael? Michael, what about you?
I'm very fortunate to have been able to plant over 200 irises last fall. That was my physical manifestation of hope. And here it is springtime, and they're starting to perk up and show themselves, and I'm quite proud of that. And it's all because I'm sober. I mean, I wouldn't have a garden, and I wouldn't be able to do that if I hadn't been sober. Wouldn't have had a house and a yard and a garden, all that stuff. I mean, I owe everything I have to sobriety. I know that for certain. And I appreciate being able to do that and express my sense of hope through gardening. It's been very satisfying. It helps keep me going.
yeah, and I just have my teeny tiny garden, and I have garden envy when I talk to Michael. But we'll be planting our teeny tiny garden on the balcony in May. Yeah, I don't. I contemplate. I've got a. I don't want to say Zen because some of my listeners will go topsy turvy on it. But I get very concentrated on my garden in the summer. I think that's an age thing. John's not retired yet. He doesn't have his garden. You got good gardens down in your place though, right?
Oh,
You've
we have
got
a
gardens
huge,
all over
yeah,
the
yeah,
place.
yeah. But
Yeah.
gardening is not my thing. It's my partner's thing. So I let him do the gardening, and I don't know. I watch Netflix or something. I don't know.
Well, you
Maybe I'm going to have to change. Maybe I'm going to
well,
have to
maybe when you
change to
get
something
10
else.
years 10 years from now when you're my age, that your attitude may change
All
when,
right, all right.
sitting in the garden is like you get focused. But I don't know. I guess maybe we're heading toward I'm looking at the timer here, and I think we're maybe heading toward the end of today's discussion. Does
Well,
that?
thank you guys for inviting me on. It's been really fun, and you guys are wonderful. And keep up this podcast, and
Okay.
I'll come
Thank
back
you.
anytime you ask.
Thank you. And well, we will definitely invite you back. We got to go through the roster.
Of course you.
We do have a nice way of ending. I was going to say closing, but that sounds too ecclesiastical. But we have a little bit of a tradition how we end this meeting. And how do we end the meeting, Michael? What do we say?
Yeah. Peace and love. Peace and love, baby. That's all we need. Peace and love.
And I
Peace
say
and love.
peace and love. Peace and love to
Bye, you
you.
guys.
We'll see
That
you.
was
We'll see you
wonderful.
soon.
All right, see you soon.